everything we read and see in the Old Testament concerning the Sabbath is a type and shadow of Jesus. It is a signpost that points to the reality that is Jesus. God did design the world in a 7-day rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And so it became part of the covenant with Israel. And all of these things were not about the thing themselves. They were about Jesus. Colossians chapter 2, this is some of what the Apostle Paul says. Verse 16, so don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days or new moon ceremonies or Sabbaths, plural Sabbaths. Verse 17, for these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality. That our restlessness in life, our slavery in life needed a reprieve. And as the seventh day rest was a natural rest from the 7 days of work, there's 6 days you work, the seventh day rest, that was a signpost to a far greater reality that Jesus makes it to where our labors are not what makes us right before God. Our efforts and our works do not make us right before God. Jesus makes us right before God. And so what the Sabbath was in symbol and in shadow, Jesus is in reality. And that's all I can say about that. So if we want to argue and fight over the Sabbath, let's look first at Jesus, not at the Sabbath. Okay, and there's more to that, but we got to move on. The principle of the Sabbath, and this is where it gets sticky when people really want to hammer down on what day is the Sabbath. And you have the Jewish people practice very rigidly 6 p.m. on Friday night to 6 p.m. on Saturday, so that Saturday, the seventh day, was the Sabbath. As Christianity took off and there was more development on the theology and practice of following Jesus, in the early centuries, it started to morph that the Lord's Day, Sunday, became a Sabbath for early Christians. And so the question, well, which day is the Sabbath? To some groups, they're going to say, well, duh, obviously it's Saturday. And then to other groups, it's like, well, it's obviously Sunday. Which is it? Neither. Jesus is the Sabbath. The principle of the Sabbath is 6 plus 1. And we'll look at the law here in just a second. The principle is 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh you rest. Well, what day is that for you? I don't personally like it that our world has gotten to where it's always work. And so I get that there's some people, maybe some people here, you're going to have to go to work. And so Sunday is a work day or Saturday is a work day. And so there's no sense in putting really ridiculous, legalistic boundaries around you and say you're violating the Sabbath. The Sabbath is 6 days you shall work, the seventh you rest. And if none of that is to the Lord, then you're doing it wrong anyway. Jesus is our Sabbath rest, but there is great wisdom and natural law, not moral law, natural law to a 7-day cycle that is 6 plus 1. That's the principle. The principle is 6 days you shall work, the seventh you rest. Romans chapter 14, this is the kind of stuff that gets Paul killed. When Paul wrote the letter to the Romans, as a way to resolve conflict between Jews and Gentiles. That's what the whole purpose of that letter was for, is that there were splits going on between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And he's like, guys, that's anti-Christ. Come on, we got to come together. And so his master work of theology through the whole letter of Romans is actually for the very practical purpose of the church to get along. Imagine that. The churches from the first did not get along very well. He says this, verse 4 of Romans 14, who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Their own master will judge whether they stand or fall, and with the Lord's help, they will stand and receive his approval. In the same way, we don't belong to laws, we don't belong to other people, we belong to the Lord. It's with that context, he says, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. So if you need to Sabbath on Monday, be fully convinced. But here's the key. This is the key to this. Verse 6, Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. Whatever day that is, honor the Lord. It's not about you. It's not about you looking all holy and righteous and above other really dumb people who just always work. It's about honoring the Lord. Whatever day that is. And so the principle is 6 plus 1, and that 1 is to honor the Lord. It's with that practical purpose that for most people, Sunday does make sense. For most people, Sunday makes sense because it involves worship, and I'll get to that when we talk about the practice. Okay, the practice of Sabbath. Here's the bottom line about the practice of Sabbath. It was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay, this is even embedded into the law. The fourth law of the 10 commandments, the first top 10, the fourth law is the Sabbath law, and people think that the law is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But here's the deal. If you take the entire 10 commandments and you do it about word count, the amount of words are used per commandment. The fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment, takes up between 25 and 30% of the entire 10 commandments. And here's the deal, just for the sake of some sarcastic humor, okay? I'm setting you up. This is sarcasm, okay? When we think, well, because of Jesus, Sabbath doesn't matter anymore. And we're going to talk the practice, and I think the practice matters. But sometimes we've tried to merge the theology of Sabbath and the practice of Sabbath and flattened it, gotten rid of it, and we are now slaves. Theologically literate slaves. But in the same way, if I came to you and I said, hey, would you help me murder someone? Now, I get that I got some friends out there that's like, who are we talking about? Like, I'm not talking about that. It's still a good idea to not murder, correct? Now, not murdering doesn't make you more holy before God, right? Because we don't appeal to the law for holiness. But it's wisdom to not murder, correct? Pick any of the commandments. It's still a good idea. If I tried to convince you to bow down to an altar, a god, you'd be like, there's something feels off about this. We probably shouldn't do that. But when we say work 7 days, we're like, yeah, we're free. We're free from the law. When the fourth law, the fourth commandment, takes up nearly over a fourth of the whole 10 commandments, there's some value in this. And again, not for an appeal to holiness, but there is wisdom here. And so here's the law. The law is not remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's verse 8. That's the first line. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. 10, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. Verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. I got to make a couple quick points about this. First, the law is 6 days you shall work, and the seventh, remember that day, set it aside as sanctified, holy, and do it to the Lord. It's an expression of worship, not an expression of holiness. It's an expression of honor. And what are we honoring? We're honoring the Lord, but we're also honoring what the Lord has blessed, the seventh day. And again, if that day for you is Saturday, 2 thumbs way up. If it's Sunday, great. But if it has to be a Wednesday because of the season of life you're in and the work cycles, great. That day is your seventh and it's unto the Lord. So for those who are afraid that we're advocating for laziness, let me double down here. 6 days you shall work. Not 40 hours, not 70 hours, not 20 hours, not 1 day, not 3 days, not 5 days. 6 days you shall work. Now work includes paid and unpaid, because let's face it, there's a lot of stuff we got to do that we don't get paid for. And it's still work. 6 days you shall work. So the advocacy is hard labor and worshipful rest. That's the principle and the practice. The practice is Do your work in 6 days. And I get you might be in a season where you're unable to find work, unable to get work, or just unable to work. Listen, there's no condemnation. I'm not trying to condemn anyone. But for those who want to live well before the Lord, we are seeking a way to honor him, and part of how we honor him is work. Work is not a part of the curse of the fall. Work is part of what it means to be made in God's image. And that's all there in Exodus and in Genesis 1. It's part of being his image. Toil and slavery to our work is a part of the curse of the fall. And so rest is what God blesses. He blesses 6 days of work, seventh day, he blesses that day. Now, 3 times in Genesis 1 and 2, in the story of creation, the word blessed is used. He blesses the animals, and connected to that blessing is fruitfulness. Be fruitful and multiply. He blesses humans in Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion. So with that blessing comes a commission. There's fruitfulness and a commission. And the third time, in Genesis 2, when it's a summary of all of Genesis 1, he blesses the seventh day. Do you not think those are related? When one word is used 3 times, 2 times it specifically designates it as fruitfulness. The third time, it's the seventh day rest that is fruitful. We think it's the 6 days of labor that's the only part of fruitfulness, and the seventh day is a waste of our fruitfulness. I'm really trying to hit some of you really hard. But no. The seventh day is blessed, meaning there's a unique fruitfulness that comes from honoring that day unto the Lord. Not being a legalist about it, not being nasty and self-righteous about it, honoring the Lord.